Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us, facing the rising sun of our new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won.
Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. This is the day that the Lord has indeed made, and we will rejoice and be glad in it. And as David said, I was glad when they said unto me, let us go now into the house of the Lord. To the Cochran Church, our E-Church, and many of you who each and every Sunday morning you tune in to this broadcast, we welcome you again. I just came off a wonderful vacation. I'm refreshed, I'm energized, but most of all, this broadcast is very dear to my heart, especially with all of the social unrest that's going on in our country. This broadcast is a presentation of our second town hall meeting. The Cochran Avenue Baptist Church Social Justice Ministry, we have had 2 marches. We have had now 2 town hall meetings, and our goal is after these 4 events, we're going to put together a petition that we can take to the City Council and the Board of Supervisors and all law enforcement, demanding the rights, especially for blacks and browns, be shifted and adjusted and flat out changed because of the mistreatment that we are enduring. So I want you just to sit back. I want you to listen to see where we are, but most of all from our local elected officials where we are heading. And after it's all over, we want you to go to mm4j.com, and we want you to re-sign and help promote this petition. God bless you and God keep you is my prayer. Enjoy this town hall meeting. Let's all bow now for a moment of silence as we remember them at this time. Now, Lord, we come in a mighty way, and we're asking that you would remember so many have lost their lives in this country. We pause at this particular time for a moment of silence as we reflect back on the life and the worth of so many in this country. Now, Lord, we look forward to a powerful but yet a peaceful and a civil conversation as we move from conversation to actual having some implementation. We thank you and we bless you for this time. In Jesus' name, amen. We look forward to what we will discuss tonight. I want to sum up as we get ready to go to our first artist that we have to recognize the fact that it's really tragic that only in the midst of crowds and only in the midst of carnage do we really have conversations. If it wasn't for so many crowds and all of the carnage throughout the landscape of this country, I doubt very seriously if we would be having this conversation. So tonight we look forward to what we will discuss as we move forward. We had a tremendous time with Jim Lafferty on our first conversation, and we are thankful that he is graciously committed to come back one more time. And so we're getting ready to throw it over to Jim, and let's look forward to this conversation. Jim?
Thank you, Pastor. Thank you so much. I really feel privileged, as I think I said last time, to have been asked, now to moderate tonight's second town hall meeting, organized and hosted by the Miracle Mile for Justice and Cochran Avenue Baptist Church. It's social justice ministry, and of course you, Pastor Charles Johnson, an activist pastor. Let me also thank Lauren Selman. It called both of these town hall meetings, did the church, because in advancement really of its three goals, its three racial justice goals, if you will. And let me just briefly mention those to you. The pastor will have more to say about this later. Number one, to bring about a restructuring of the Los Angeles Police Department in connection with the tactics it uses, accountability and its assets. Number two, to see instituted a comprehensive retraining program for LAPD officers aimed at how to, de-escalate confrontations, teach anger management, better problem solving and the like. And three, to launch an initiative whereby the city of Los Angeles adopts a Declaration of Human Rights covering all of us living in Los Angeles. I first want to also thank each and every one of you who has joined us by Zoom tonight, including, of course, most especially our government officials. I think with the exception of Chief Moore, who I thank for joining us tonight, all the others, panelists, were with us the first time as well, and we thank you for joining us again. I said at the opening of our first town hall meeting that we're clearly at an historic crossroads in America today. For over 100 days now, on the streets of our city and in thousands of cities all across America, the Black Lives Matter movement against institutionalized white racism in general and racist policing in particular continues to challenge America to abandon its racist ways of the past and, finally become the America where all people are not only technically, as we like to say, born equal, but in fact are able to live their lives in this country as full and equal members of our society. Now, today's movement is bigger, it's broader, it's more powerful, more promising than, frankly, any of the anti-racist movements in the past. But perhaps most important, its message is also much sharper and much clearer and more sweeping than in the past. And what is that message? And this, I think, is critically important. Its message is simply that white supremacy is the biggest racial problem this country faces and has faced. As author Charles Blow has written, quote, "It has been used, white supremacy, to slaughter and destroy, to oppress and imprison. It is manifest in every segment of American life." And to that, I would only add that until the cancer of white supremacy is eliminated, the cancer of racial injustice will continue to destroy our country. Let me also add that this largely peaceful pro-Black Lives Matter protest have recently, of course, come to include, and this is what the media tends to focus on, understandably, I guess, more acts of violence or property damage. And I believe, and from what I have seen and studied and the people I've talked to, this is primarily due to the invasion into this Black Lives Matter protest movement of white supremacists and of neo-Nazis and other right-wing hate groups, and no doubt some government agent provocateurs as well. And so, sisters and brothers, we're now called to do all within our collective power to stand our ground, to continue to build the anti-racist movement that is so wonderfully splayed out there before us in our streets, to build it. And we are called upon, after all, to drive the nails of love and equal justice into the coffin lid of white supremacy and racism. So let this town hall meeting represent one more nail one more nail in racism's coffin. Well, now let me introduce this evening's panelists. I'm going to introduce them in alphabetical order. First, Mr. Ron Galperin, who is the Los Angeles, is he not with us tonight yet?
Doesn't look like he's with us yet.
He plans to be, so hopefully he'll be here. He's Los Angeles City Controller. Ms. Lindsey Horvath, I have seen. She is the mayor of West Hollywood. She was with us last time and is back with us again. Good evening, Lindsey. Mr. Mark Ridley-Thomas. I saw Mr. Mark Ridley-Thomas, now a candidate he was on the Board of Commissioners, now a candidate, of course, for City Council District 10. Mr. David Rue, City Council Member of Los Angeles from the 4th District. Attorney Grace Yu, a candidate for City Council District 10, and has Herb Wesson, who I know planned on joining us, joined us yet?
Yes.
He has. Ah, good. And Herb Wesson. Herb Wesson is currently a member of the LA City Council, 10th District, but he's a candidate now for the LA County Board of Commissioners for District 2. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, we have with us tonight as well, the Chief of Police of Los Angeles, Michael Moore. And now the putting of questions to the panelists can begin. And I think Lauren already mentioned that those of us watching on Zoom, you should be putting your questions into the chat box so that we can get to those later. But I'm going to start off otherwise asking questions of my own. And these are questions of my own, but also I should say in many cases, I've tried to incorporate, and I think I have incorporated into them a number of questions that the Social Justice Ministry of the Church was hoping to ask tonight. There's a certain overlap, so I've put them together. Here's my first question. And I want to preface this simply by saying that despite the fact, as I mentioned earlier, this movement has now been going on very powerfully for over 100 days now. There has sadly been, as far as I can tell, and I've tried to research it pretty thoroughly, very, very little reform that has yet happened, not simply in our city and state, but all over the country. Oh, there's been some, but it's been quite marginal, really. And opportunities to do much more with often very simple and not that radical measures of reform have been defeated in state legislatures, including our own. In fact, despite the fact that we have an overwhelming Democratic Party majority in both the Assembly and the Senate, that is in our legislature here, supposedly a more liberal part of our legislature, and a number of police reform bills were introduced into this last legislative session, the fact of the matter is, most of them, all of them really of any substance whatsoever, either didn't get a vote or were voted down. And that was on the last night of the session when sadly another Black man was killed in Los Angeles County, in this case by the Sheriff's Department. So the really, really modest police reform measures that I'm talking about that were not enacted, did not become law in California are these. And I spelled them out because I want to ask the chief and all of our panelists what they think about them. Number one, there was a bill that would have decertified any police officer who was removed from one police department for acts of malfeasance, so that that officer would be decertified, if you will, and could not get a job with another police agency in that state. I think, the chief will no doubt correct me if I'm wrong about this, I think California is one of only 5 states in the country that does not have that decertification law, but it failed here. Another bill that failed would have allowed citizens to see the records of cops who had complaints against her or been found within the department engaged in abusive acts. Another failed measure would have banned the use by police of those rubber bullets and tear gas and what have you that we've seen used so often in these protests. It also did not become law. And finally, another proposal that didn't become law would have required any police officer who sees another police officer clearly violating the rights of someone else, either through their violent act or other illegal act, would have had a duty, had this law passed, to have intervened and tried to stop that police officer or officers from continuing with those illegal acts. None of them passed. So, Chief Moore, let's start with you. I know for one thing, your time's a little limited with us tonight. I think you've got to leave at about 7 o'clock. Chief Norton, let me start with you. With respect to each of those 4 failed legislative measures I've just described, do you support, had you been in the legislature, for example, would you have voted for any of them? Or would you also have not wanted to see any of them passed as they were not?
Thank you, Jim and Lauren and Pastor Johnson for the opportunity to be here. And let me say right off the bat that LAPD has already implemented these, a number of these as policy, and we are currently being governed by a limitation on the state on these other matters that we look forward to the state legislative working with police chiefs of the state of California, myself included, as well as with the rank and file, the labor unions. And let me talk about them one by one. Duty to intervene. That is a policy of the Los Angeles Police Department that officers involved in an instance which there is a use of force and if that use of force is excessive, unnecessary, the officer is committing misconduct, the officer has a duty, the other officer, the partner officer, has now a duty to intervene. While that's been existing in the past, this past summer, the Board of Police Commissioners formalized it into an explicit policy. And we've already acted on officers who, when they have failed to intervene, we are disciplining, and that discipline can improve their removal. Let me move to the decertifying of officers. I think it's, I look forward to California joining the majority of the states in this union, that when a police officer who has to be certified in a state in order to be a police officer standards and training, that certificate, which I have on my wall from, I hate to say it, 1982, as well as a number of others in the following years. But when you lose that certificate, you lose your right to be a police officer in this state. And that decertification post up to this point has refused to be an adjudicator or reviewer and wants to take that away. They said, well, yes, the officer's committed misconduct. Yes, the officer has done this malfeasance, but it's not us to decertify. And there has to have been actions by the state legislature that says that officer is committed of a felony to stop that officer from actually being a police officer in some other agency. And I have seen officers within my short 2-year plus tenure as a chief and over my nearly 4 decades that have been fired from LAPD for misconduct and go to other police agencies and become police officers. And I've seen instances in which later that agency in that city regretted that decision because that officer committed further acts of misconduct. So that is overdue. And I believe also that this is a statement that while that bill did not proceed, Craig Lally and the Los Angeles Police Protective League came out and committed to joining the effort and to see that legislation is brought back before the legislation and is seen and sees success in a decertification. So, I'm particularly pleased on both the duty to intervene and decertifying that these are matters that the LAPPL, along with San Francisco police officers and San Jose, did a full-page ad a couple months ago supporting criminal justice reform and supporting police reform, and acknowledge that as there's racism in America, there's racism exists in policing. A statement that I was ecstatic to see, and I joined with Chief Bill Scott and the chief from San Jose, and we wrote a three-author byline congratulating that growth, that movement, because moving forward, we need to find all of law enforcement. Policy, culture eats policy for lunch. And so we can make policies, we can make training, we can have expectations, but until we win the hearts and minds of our people, then this is a difficult battle, but one we're due. Let me ask the last 2 points: transparency and discipline. This is an area that I think there's more work to be done in gaining the support of our rank and file. I believe personally, as a chief of police, that if I discipline someone, that I need to be able to tell people what that discipline was. That's a matter of fairness. It's a fairness for those who would wish for the officer to be removed. And I'll say, I disagree with you. I'm going to punish that officer, but I'm not going to remove him. I'm going to give him a suspension or a reprimand, or vice versa. I fire the officer, and I'm prohibited by telling them that I fired him. So they don't know what the outcome of this is. So the outcome of discipline, I believe people, the rank and file, I understand the aversion to it, but I believe that it's time for us to move forward in the 21st century and get rid of that cloak that is undermining the public's faith in us. Now, as to rubber bullets, if you will, these foam projectiles, the use of tear gas, Tear gas in a public setting has not been used by the Los Angeles Police Department since 1968. And I have no intention to change that. It is a matter that I do see agencies across America that rely upon tear gas to disperse violent crowds, to disperse individuals that are committing acts of violence, that violence, whether it be attacks or it be arsons and looting and fires in an area. And as to that use, I do believe that both those and less lethal, that the efforts to ensure that they are consistent with LAPD policy and our use of less lethal has to be in reaction to a violent act and a specific individual committing that act. And I believe that that is a threshold that provides a reasonableness to ask our officers to go into difficult and challenging circumstances, exposing officers to dangers such as bricks and rocks and all types of attacks, and they need to be able to defend themselves with something other than a firearm. And I believe that this tool has its place. I look forward to the legislature as it comes back, looking to LAPD and us working with them, because as you saw the differences in the use of force policies that are adopted statewide this last year and a half, those are direct descendants of changes and reforms in the Los Angeles Police Department that have taken place in the last 2 years.
And Chief, I do want to get to the other panelists, and I thank you.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. It was a full question, but I'd be remiss if I didn't say that the use of rubber bullets and other less lethal weapons were used visually in the eyes of the media and in front of all the people of Los Angeles in ways not consistent with your policy. So if that is your policy, I guess what I'm asking is, what more are you prepared to do to make sure that that policy, because let's be honest, it wasn't followed to the letter or even the spirit in recent months. So
Well,
if that is your policy, how do you
Sure.
intend to make it manifest itself more fully on the streets?
Well, what I want to first do is explicitly state, as I have and I'm committed publicly, if we find that officers violate our policy and misuse those tools, and those officers will be disciplined, those officers will be punished, those individuals. If we found that command officers or that supervisors instructed the use of those weapon systems in a manner that does not meet our policy, then actual discipline will take place with them. There are actually 2 independent investigations that are going on today. One initiated by the city council, that's going to be led by Mr. Jerry Chaliff, who is a former, he's a civil rights attorney. He has standing as a former president of the Board of Police Commissioners, and he worked for their Office of Constitutional Policing and Policy. And he's brought in a series of subject matter experts, and they're going to review our actions leading up to, during the aftermath of about a 2-week period in which civil unrest and demonstrations, many of them peaceful, but others that devolved into violence and involving police use of these tools, as you said, these weapon systems, and whether or not those are legitimate and whether or not those were warranted and reasonable. We also have about more than 40 investigators that are investigating allegations of excessive force, of the misuse of these systems. And I'll review each of those investigations carefully. Those investigations are going to include not just statements, but video evidence, body-worn video, closed-circuit television, camera footage from the media representatives, and we'll evaluate each of those. And if should I find individuals that misuse their authority and misuse their power, there will be actions taken. I've already removed. I'll get to the last point. I've already removed a series of officers that I witnessed use force in one of these demonstrations in the San Fernando Valley, in which I felt that I have no means of identifying how it was justified. And while I won't judge it yet, because I need to let the investigation take place, I've acted quickly. Lastly, the Board of Police Commissioners themselves initiated a independent after-action report framed much like the Mr. Chaliff's report, led by the renowned National Police Foundation, which is a think tank out of Washington, D.C., and they're doing a top-to-bottom review right now as well. I hope for both those reports, as well as my investigative efforts, personnel complaints, to be done by the end of this year, and to make public those findings and those consequences and recommendations.
All right, now we're going to give the other panelists a chance. Each question I'm going to then reverse the order. I'll start off alphabetical order and then reverse it for the next question. I don't think Ron Galpin has yet joined us. If I'm wrong, somebody correct me. So I think then the mayor of West Hollywood, Lindsey Horvath, you'd be next. I hope you could remember the question. I don't have to repeat it all. I mentioned a number of bills, 4 of them in particular, that failed in the legislature. And I was wondering what you thought about the failure of those bills, whether you would support them had you been in the legislature. And in your case, since your city, of course, is patrolled, policed, if you will, by the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, would you want to see those bills passed so that the sheriffs operating your city would have to operate pursuant to them?
So I'm not familiar with all of the details of the bills, but reform is definitely needed. And with all due respect to the people who work very hard to represent the uniform well in our communities, they were the ones who were fighting those bills, and that's why they were defeated. So I think that what we need to be honest about is we don't have a perfect system right now, and there are lots of problems that need to be fixed. And if we're going to get to a place where they get fixed, we can't just say no to all of the changes that people are bringing forward in order to actually make that change a reality. We need to make sure also that there's accountability. And I think that what we hear a lot from people who are taking to the streets and having these conversations in our communities is there's certainly accountability on folks in the community, but what happens with the accountability on the other side? And what we know, and what I've been working on with mayors across the country, in the U.S. Conference of Mayors recently had a conversation about potential reforms, but I would also add that their current president is the mayor of the city where Breonna Taylor was killed. But I will say that the conversations that mayors across the country are having is that we know that the best allies we could possibly ask for are people in uniform who don't want to see these acts of violence and acts of assault and acts of murder continue to happen. And so what I would like to see is people in uniform stepping up and working to make some of these reforms actually happen, instead of saying no to all of the changes that people are proposing in order to make our systems better.
You know, thank you for that. And then I just wanted to also comment on one last thing that you said before I turn to the next panelist. You made the point, and I've done some research on this as well, that those bills were defeated in large measure because of the lobbying efforts of the police unions around the state, who gave more money in recent years, who keep giving more and more money to the politicians. And we know the role that money plays in politics. I don't think we should be surprised. There's no law currently against the police unions doing that. Some of us feel that they ought not to have the right to do that, or they ought not to be unions in the normal sense of the word. But your observation, I think, has been confirmed by my research as well. So I thank you for that.
And then if we just add on to that, yes. I didn't specifically address the Sheriff's Department. I also serve as the president of California Contract Cities Association, which represents all of the cities which contract for service with the Sheriff's Department. And we have, under my presidency, created a public safety working group to review with all of the cities who contract for service, what level of service is like in each of our communities, what level of awareness each of the elected officials, city managers, and public safety directors have about the terms of the contract, and how those contracts are actually working or not working in our communities. And we're actively having those conversations. There's also a liability trust fund that exists. It's an oversight committee and claims board, which functions similarly to some of the LA Police Commission, reviewing officer-involved shootings or other incidents. And so we have systems of review that are in place, and I know that there also is the Citizens Oversight Commission through the county. But you know, we're seeing all of those issues, and we are having that conversation for systemic change.
Thank you, thank you. Mark Ridley-Thomas, I think you're next.
I've got a question from the outside. That goes hand in hand with that question that came in during that last panel. That just goes hand in hand with what Mayor Horvath was saying. The question says, where do current council members and council candidates consider Garcetti expanding the LAPD community safety partnership with regards to reimagining public safety?
All right, but that's fine, and they can answer that question if they wish it. But I still want to give them an opportunity. I think it's only fair. If they don't want to, they don't have to. They can address that question instead. But the question they haven't yet also had a chance to answer is whether or not they oppose or approve or disapprove of what the legislature didn't do this time, which is pass those 4 bills. Mark Ridley-Thomas, and then you've heard that other question as well from one of the folks on Zoom. So take your pick and answer them all, or answer them both, or either one.
Well, thanks very much for the opportunity to participate tonight. Let me just simply say my years of investment in police accountability and issues related to transparency and law enforcement remained at the top of my policymaking agenda. It is just simply what's necessary in the interest of the protection, the preservation of democracy, and to protect and preserve constitutional rights of the citizenry and the human rights of all residents. This has been my posture, and it remains my posture since the time of, you remember this, James, the shooting of Eula May Love in 1978. I was at the Southern Christian Leadership Conference on the board, and we pushed for that. And so what I know is the following: we need federal standards. And this is why I strongly embrace the work that our Congresswoman Karen Bass has led in terms of the George Floyd Police Accountability and Reform Act. And so the work that's being done at the legislative level will be effectively subsumed and standardized by the federal intervention that I think is desperately needed. That's where my focus is and shall remain. It is not to disregard or demean whatever efforts have to happen at the state and local levels, but the federal standards and all of what makes that happen is a very viable and very important set of priority initiatives that we should have in place. And with respect to the question from the audience,
Yeah, yes.
the posture that we embrace and that I advance is care first, jail last. It is the priority posture and policy making of the County Board of Supervisors. And that's why we have the Office of Diversion and Reentry. That's why we have alternatives to incarceration. These are matters on which I led and will continue to do so. That's why we have a Citizens Oversight Commission. It is essentially the case that if we want accountability, we have to have the institutional framework to cause it to happen. And it's an untenable set of circumstances at this moment in time that we have a sheriff who's bent on intimidation tactics as it relates to members of the Board of Supervisors. Good luck with that, Sheriff. That won't work. The Inspector General that practically precipitates an obstruction of justice charge and more. And so it's on. We're clear about it, and we will not tolerate this sheriff turning back the clock of a decade of absolute hard work, starting with the Jail Violence Commission that ultimately resulted in Paul Tanaka and Lee Baca being jailed for their misdeeds and violations of law. Therefore, I take that position unapologetically and will continue to press accordingly.
All right. And this is a question the church ministry wanted me to ask you as well,
Okay.
Chief, and the other panelists. You know, a major demand that has been emerged from the Black Lives Matter movement, of course, is the demand to, quote unquote, defund the police. And the great majority of those making that demand, when you actually talk to them, some mean it exactly as it says, but the great majority, when you talk to them, say, they don't mean having no police department whatsoever, but rather that the city should spend the overwhelming lioness share, if you will, of the city budget on social programs that, if properly funded and administered, would go a great distance towards reducing crime, creating an environment in our city where most of what the police now have to or now do spend their time doing could and would be done by other agencies better trained to do it. Mental health agencies, employment training, job creation agencies, and the like. So, and a recent poll of 24,000 folks conducted by the People's Budget found that overwhelmingly the people, and they had at least 300 responses from every council district. Overwhelmingly, these 24 organizations that conducted this poll, overwhelmingly these 24,000 people felt that 90% or more of the city's budget money should really go for those kinds of things. That you know, the idea of the police issuing tickets and the police going out on homeless disputes, neighborhood disputes, domestic disputes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, was something that the police shouldn't do. I guess I want you, before you leave, I want to ask you to what extent, and I know the police union, I know the police union's position, but I'm wondering if you would tell us what your position is on this notion of removing from the responsibility and the writ, if you will, of the police in America, those functions that many argue could be better done, more peacefully done, in a non-militaristic, non-police, non-confrontational way by trained professionals. And I indicated some of those areas. What's your opinion on that?
We welcome the opportunity. This is a matter that, first of all, let me say the defund, you talk to 10 people, you get 10 different definitions of what defunding the police means. Certainly we're committed to reforming police, to reforming criminal justice. We have 6 core values as an organization. Our motto is to protect and to serve. And our 6th value is quality through continuous improvement. Evolution of policing, leading American policing is something that we have done. We've made historic strides. We got a lot more places to go. And right now, this moment, I believe the critical aspect is that the mayor, city council has clearly said, we ask this department to do too much. We ask them to be involved in activities that we do not believe they should be involved in. And they have realigned and they have taken 150 million, downsized our department by 500 personnel. And we are in the process of attriting down to that level, which will occur in its completion within the next 9 months.
And that's okay. And that's okay with you.
It's okay with me as long as this is we follow through with the entire commitment. And the entire commitment is that we're going to do homeless outreach and engagement, that we're going to have resources and we're going to have people who are going to handle those calls. These are calls for service that the police do not go out and look for. These are millions of people who call asking for help. And the Los Angeles Police Department is a 24/7, 365 agency, as is the fire department. There is no social service program in Los Angeles that's 24/7 anywhere near the scale it needs to be. And so I challenge this framework to build it because it's enacted it for the department. And we are identifying now the matters that we will gladly move out. But I'm worried that in the last 3 months, enough progress has not been made for us to hand this baton off. We are not holding on this baton with tight hands. And I would exercise some caution, though, about some matters, domestic violence particularly. I want to make sure that victims of domestic violence, that survivors of domestic violence, that law enforcement just doesn't hand that off to a social service agency. We can look at the Department of Children and Family Services, which we currently share jurisdiction with. And out of the hundreds of thousands of cases in which they're involved in, they generally, in that social programming, get it right. But there are instances in which they do not. And there are criminal matters about that. And so there's this sharing of responsibility. But let me close by saying, we're supportive of alternate services. We are supportive of asking us to do less, because for too much, We've been asked we've been for too long asked to do too much with too little. And it's been this pressure point that has caused us to be at times be alienating communities, the very communities that we wish to serve and protect. So mental health services, absolutely. Homeless outreach and engagement, absolutely. Traffic collisions, 60,000 traffic collisions last year in which there was no criminal prosecution. It was a complained of injury or otherwise, not certainly a serious or death injury, but just a fender bender. We have officers that go out and spend hours on those investigations, waiting at hospital rooms for hours for people in order to just simply commit a report that's going to go to an insurance agency. So in the next 30 to 45 days, I'll be bringing before the Board of Police Commissioners and to the City Council, and I'm already in discussions with the mayor, that we need to right-size our department. And that department downsizing has happened. And of course, the other matter is this city is in the worst economic crisis of any of our generations. And it is going to have to struggle to find the ways to provide its most basic services.
And that would be good. I will follow up and ask the other members here, especially the council members, to see whether or not how they feel the city is doing, the city council is doing in being prepared when your officers pull back from those areas and perhaps more to fill the void. And I thank you for joining us tonight, Chief.
And I do miss, but I'll look forward to catching up. This is recorded, so I look forward to watching the rest of the episode. And thank you all for this opportunity. God bless.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief. So David?
Thanks, James. It's a pleasure to be here again. I'm glad we're continuing the conversation. You know, the way it's going, I think we got to do another one, Pastor. So,
Right.
Oh yeah, we're not done.
But you gave me a couple of several questions. What I was trying to say, because I really wanted the chief, I thank the chief for being here. I really wanted the chief to comment on this, because I know one of the questions earlier was about community policing and how I felt about that. And you know, community policing works. I support community policing. And I actually wanted the chief to talk about it himself, because there has been a new community policing bureau, LAPD, that the chief has created a subdivision of it, led by Chief Tingrides. And, you know, and what they did was and I know Councilmember Marquise Harris Dawson, I believe Councilmember Wesson, and Councilmember Price has been leading the charge on this. And what they did was they found the best community policing model in South LA, where the community have built tremendous relationships with their senior lead officers. And they got that model and modified it and tried to see how they could replicate that model. And that's where they came up with the whole new division of community policing. Community Policing Bureau. So, and that is something, look, is this the fix all? Of course not. This is another step towards the right direction while we start right-sizing the police department. To answer the question that you asked, James, you know, that's the same concern that I do have, and that's why I introduced the Office of Violence Prevention. And I know, and my colleagues also, we've also introduced similar things. No matter what you call it, we have introduced we have already asked for the model to take over the backfill of all those things that the chief was talking about. You know, as we know, 80 to 90% of police calls and 911 calls don't require an unarmed police officer. And we want to, and in many cases, you heard the chief here, you heard it from his own mouth. He doesn't want to do it either. His officers don't want to do it either. But over the course of decades, police officers have become the end all be all. They literally are animal care control officers called for dogs or cats, all the way to violent crimes, which they should be called for. And that's why we schools, I mean, you name it, and even homeless calls. You know, officers know, no matter how much we train officers, it's not enough. They're not social workers. They're not mental health workers. Some are very good at their jobs, but still, just the mere fact that a unhoused neighbor sees an officer in uniform with a gun is automatically a situation for potential conflict. And they know that themselves. They don't want to go out. And actually, Chief Moore, I remember about a year or two ago, not challenged, but told the County Department of Mental Health, which is LA County, to say, hey, you give us the social worker or mental health worker, I will give you an officer. And obviously, the Department of Mental Health, who represents 88 other cities, couldn't give us enough of the social workers that we needed. That's why we're talking about the Office of Violence Prevention, or whatever we call this new division, that can take a lot of those roles. And I think the last question, the first question was duty to intervene. I'm glad that in the city of LA and LAPD, we have already instituted many of the things that the state couldn't do it statewide. I support decertification. You know, when it comes to rubber bullets and tear gas, yes, that's the same question we asked, because when I saw it on TV, they sure look like tear gas and rubber bullets to me. But obviously, they're foam bullets. But I think the true question is whether it's a foam bullet, rubber bullet, tear gas, or a tear gas derivative. The real reason is, and I'm waiting for these reports to come back, is not what is used, but why and how, right? It's crowd control tactics. No matter what. And you heard the chief say he needs something besides lethal force. Yes, but it's not just having that tool, but is when do you use that tool? You know, this peaceful protest went sideways. Why? You know, and this is why, and the police chief said there's 2 reports. There's actually 3 reports. He alluded to it, where there's one done by a completely independent body, and then there's one done by the normal channels that we have investigatory. So there's actually 3 audits going on, 3 reviews going on at the same time of not just what happened in the Fairfax district, but all throughout the city. So I think that's.
I'm going to move on, and thank you. I just want to make one comment that's been a lot of study by former police chiefs, I might add, and others experts in policing who have been able to demonstrate and make the point that the mere presence at demonstrations, peaceful demonstrations of those guns, those bullets, rubber bullets, the grenade, and all of that stuff tends to provoke violence. And so there's a question about whether they should be brought there in the first place and what have you. And of course, the chief mentioned many police officers injured by those bullets. I can tell you from our work of the Lawyers Guild, and it's in our lawsuits that we're bringing, that there were many more people injured, civilians injured by the use of rubber bullets and by the riot sticks of the police beating them than were injuries suffered by the police. Grace, you're next to answer this bundle of questions that are now before you.
Councilman David Rue actually had a lot of great points about where LAPD is right now. The chief talked about how LAPD has already required and set into policy the duty to intervene that the state was not able to pass. And I'm really glad to see that as a mandated requirement of officers, so that when their partner is going rogue, it must be reported. Just like when there's child abuse and teachers see this, it must be mandated and reported. And as far as decertifying officers, absolutely we need that database. You know, we don't need rogue officers to go from one division or one city to the next, or to go from LAPD to the sheriffs. We need transparency and accountability, not just in the police department, but in the entire city. Government accountability is sorely lacking, and we need to beef that up. And when it comes to the rubber bullets and the tear gas, doesn't matter what the policy says, because we saw it on TV. I don't think all the newscasters made things up. They were just shooting live, videotaping live what was going on. The fact that we have needs in reshifting how LAPD works, the demilitarization is definitely key. Civilians should not be shot at, whether they're foam bullets, rubber bullets. They still leave bruises. And I know because a friend of mine was on Facebook Live videotaping all of this. And so we were all in shock that he was shot. And this is too frequent. And we need this change in policy. And this is where your city council can really make a difference.
Thank you.
So I know one of the questions was also, Lauren, if you would refresh my recollection, that initial first person question?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of people, we're doing upvotes right now with questions. So it's of utmost interest of the audience. Where do current council member and council candidates consider Garcetti expanding the LAPD community safety partnership with regards to reimagining public safety? I also just kind of want to tie in there a following question that's getting as much votes, which is around bias training. So I'm just gonna, how much time and finances will be invested in training on implicit bias, anti-racist training to foster healing between community and the police department, just kind of hand in hand with community policing?
You know, community policing is definitely the way to go, because officers and civilians should not treat each other as the enemy. We need to come together, and I think more opportunities in which we see a peaceful conversation occurring can only heal us. And definitely when it comes to the police needing additional training for diversity, for racial bias and prejudices, I think that is an ongoing need, just like there are continuing legal education courses that attorneys must take, or medical doctors, or any professional who is out there. You need to continuously learn. And so, of course, I would be supportive of having that diversity training and ongoing racial bias training, because it changes and we need to be up to date on everything that occurs.
Can I plug in my own personal question to that? Just
Sure.
my understanding, does the city council, do you do any sort of non-bias training? Like, is there anything in terms of the training of the council that goes hand in hand with that?
I'm not a councilwoman, so.
What do you mean, of the police
Herb
department? or-
Wesson is next.
Herb Wesson.
Where's Herb?
Herb's here. Herb's been here.
I know Herb. And so let me just cut in and let Herb.
Okay, well, let me jump in.
Yeah.
Jim, let me jump in. Jim, it was a pleasure to be with you the last time. It's a pleasure to be with you this time. I want to reference something that Pastor Johnson said at the beginning. He showed his pain and his frustration in that it seems to take acts of carnage or chaos in order for us to have conversations about real change. And Pastor, I feel your pain as well. But that's why it's so important that we don't blow this moment. Because of the pain, because of the people that have lost lives. And this, again, is the greatest opportunity in the history of this country for positive change. You know, we have several electeds that are on this call, and each and every one of them have been involved in trying to make police department or law enforcement more transparent. We've all fought for these things. When I was the Speaker of the California State Assembly back in 2002, before this was really, the thing to do, we put in place one of the first reform commissions where we brought in folk and Connie Rice, and we required additional training. We provided whistleblower protection. We afforded individuals that wanted to make complaints the opportunities to make complaints where they didn't have to actually go into the police station and make complaints because they felt intimidated. So there have been laws upon laws. So what that tells me is that maybe it's not the police, it is the system of policing that needs to be changed. And that's why I'm proud to be the member who is taking the point on reimagining public safety. And what that means is everything where it relates to criminal justice system. You just heard a chief talk about how flexible and open he is to shed off responsibilities. I believe we can get this done, but the key is this is our moment. This is our time, and we have to do this right, and it must work. So the city of Los Angeles, Jim, has not just been sitting back on its heels. We have had 3 very productive reimagining public conversations with the community. And let me tell you, we've gotten all kinds of recommendations as to what we should do. But let me kind of lay out for you what appears to be the major themes that have come from these reimagining conversations. Number 1, people want to see more investment in economically challenged areas, because most areas where there is investment, there is reduced crime. Another theme that was prevalent throughout these meetings was the need to deal with individuals that have mental health and substance abuse issues. How can we deal with them differently? And quickly, one of my most favorite things that came out of these discussions, all of us know somebody, and maybe some of us have found ourselves in a situation where you have been out and you've had, Jim, too much Hennessy, and you do things that don't make sense, and somebody calls the police on you. We've seen this occur throughout this country where these individuals have been killed. Would it not make sense to send out a trained duo of individuals, you know, man and a woman, that can go and say, hey, here's a bottle of water, relax for a minute. Why don't I take you home, and my partner is authorized to drive your vehicle home? You take that individual home. He may wake up in the morning with one hell of a hangover, but he's going to wake up. And then he's going to find next to him an order from the court to appear in the next 45 days to deal with all of the mayhem he may have created. We're talking about maybe blending a mental health response. Possibly, I know the mayor believes that we should work with the county and the fire department. So that's one thing. Another thing that came out is traffic accidents and traffic incidents that the chief spoke of. Because, you know, usually when there are mental health issues, alcohol issues, and traffic stops, that's when we get most of our conflicts between law enforcement and the public. We're talking about our community interventionists, the individuals that work with the community, that work with the gangs, some retraining for them so that they might be in a position to handle the homeless issues. So we are, again, looking at these things, and shortly, probably within the next few weeks, the subcommittee that I chair, where it relates to police reform, will meet on these issues. And so I'm very optimistic as to where we are, where it relates to a shot at changing or reforming the system. You have to realize we have a significant percentage of people out in the community that are supporting this effort. But there's a significant percentage of people out in the community that would love to see this fail. We cannot miss this moment. I want to make sure that my grandkids live in a better world than I lived in. So I am going to spend most of my time on this issue and this issue alone, because if we can do it in Los Angeles, we can do it throughout the United States of America.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We want to rush to say, especially, we always want to be sensitive to our time, and we want to rush to say thank you to everyone. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, all of the panelists. We appreciate you for this second town hall meeting, and we recognize the fact that we literally, as Councilman Wesson said, had 400 or 500 questions just in a matter of a few minutes. So we say thank you to everybody. We recognize the fact that we talked about police accountability, decertification, even community policing, and we went so many other areas that we could have spent most of the night on. And we want to rush to say all of this is about agreement. Those who are listening and watching, did you agree with the answers and responses? Can you find common ground with those comments? And what we want to do, because we believe at the end of the day, we always want to make sure that we just didn't get on just to have conversation and dialogue. And so what we want you to do, if you can go to mm4j.com, again, mm4j.com. Lauren is showing the t-shirt. We actually are putting and have put together a petition that basically says we agree with everything that we heard tonight. And what we're going to do, we want you to go again to mm4j.com. And if you agree with what you heard, if you agree with policing, if you agree with a decertification of bad officers, we want you to sign that petition. And guess what? We're going to send this petition out to all our panelists as well. We want this petition to reach the city council, the supervisors, the police chiefs, and all of the satellite offices and stations. And so it's all about agreement. Do you agree? And what are we saying we agree? We're saying the only thing that's really going to change what we see before our eyes is that we are concerned, no matter if you black, white, green, Republican, Democrat, athlete, academician, in, out, we agree with the fact that we have to be concerned about the well-being of our fellow brother. It doesn't matter if you're white or black, and really that's what love is all about. So I say to all of the panelists, I love you because I am concerned about the well-being of everyone. And with that in mind, we again go to mm4j.com and please sign that petition. We want it to hit the council, hit the board of supervisors, and every police department. We're going to send it to the sheriff's office, and we want that to take some traction. Thank you. And we're about to bow our heads for a quick word of prayer, as we always do. Lord, we thank you, and we ask your blessings upon us. Thank you for this conversation. Thank you for this dialogue. And may the Lord now bless you. May the Lord keep you. May the Lord lift his countenance upon you and grant you peace. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us, facing the rising sun of our new day begun. Let us march on till victory.